Honourable Ruth Dyson.
It's just become blindingly obvious to me, Mr Speaker, why when that member, who's just resumed his seat, paraded up and down the streets of Epsom saying, please don't vote for me, vote for John Banks, that he had such a huge ability to persuade people. I think that would have been a very easy request when he said, don't vote for me. That speech has just confirmed the people of Epsom's correctness in choosing that as an option. That was an extraordinary speech, really extraordinary. I'm not quite sure what the member stands for or against, but neither was clear in his speech. Does the member support sustainability? I think that's probably a no. Does he support the use of biofuels? Not clear either. Does he support his own, this is not a trick question, but listen to it carefully. Does he support his own government's subsidy of biofuels? Oh no, he's going to consider that. He's seeking advice from the maestro, Jonathan Coleman, on that very point. Could I recommend that you ignore it, like the rest of his colleagues do? Ignore it. Mr Speaker, I was very pleased, however, to see that member take a call, because I thought that the National Party had given up. They put poor old Nicky Wagner and Maggie Barry up, and they really had to work hard to justify to their so-called former blue-green constituency how they could possibly be voting against sustainable biofuels legislation. How could they do that? Just amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to the next Blue-Greens conference where they'll be explaining it to the National Party members who I know up and down the country are going, they're voting against what? They're truly voting against a sustainable biofuel bill on the grounds of sustainability. Well, work that one out. I've listened to all their speeches tonight, listened to all their speeches, and what the member who spoke earlier from the Green Party said, Gareth Hughes, is absolutely right. They're voting against it because it's a Green Party bill, not because they have any principles or values or any integrity in their voting. They're just voting against it because they couldn't bear to see a Green Party bill progress. Well, I think we should be a little more mature in this Parliament. I think we should vote for bills if we think they're good and vote against them if we think they're bad, regardless of which party is introducing them. But we've had MMP in this Parliament for quite a long time, and I would have thought that may have been one of the lessons that could have been learned from our new voting system. Talking about MMP, Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge the former co-leader of the Green Party, Jeanette Fitzsimons, and say what a huge contribution she made, clearly not to progressing this issue, but to get the issue on the table in Parliament and arouse a huge amount of debate. My colleague, Moana Maki, who gave the most sensible contribution amongst the rabble from the National Party, followed closely after by Grant Robertson and Gareth Hughes. Thank goodness some sense during this debate, but Moana Maki outlined very clearly the issues that were raised during our introduction as a Labour-led government of the biofuels issue, and the contribution that Jeanette Fitzsimons made, and the debate that happened at the Select Committee, the changes that were made. Materia Ture became the lead spokesperson, I think, eventually on that issue, and now Kennedy Graham's picked it up. So it's been around the Parliament for a long time. And I suppose it's really quite odd to think that after all that thinking, all the contributions from the submitters, the work that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment did, the officials put in hours and hours of work to support a sustainable biofuels industry in New Zealand. And here we are, Wednesday night in Parliament, and the National Party, and ACT, and Peter Dunn, I suppose, and I don't know about the Māori Party, haven't heard their contribution yet, are going to vote it down. What is it about a sustainable biofuels industry in New Zealand that we don't want? I don't understand it. Oh, the member who didn't want anyone to vote for him made an interjection. Fortunately, I didn't hear it. I'm really relieved, actually, that I didn't. No, it's a he. Is it he? It's whatever his name is that John Banks beat anyway. The young man who wrote John Banks' biography and then stood against him and asked people not to vote for him. The biofuels industry itself has told us that as a nation they could provide us with 30% of our fuel needs. I think that sounds quite good, Mr. Speaker. I think that that's something that most New Zealanders would aspire to. Most New Zealanders don't like our reliance on imported fuel, and we particularly don't like the price. What is it about New Zealand jobs that the National Party don't like, when we had a huge amount of interest and commitment from the biofuels industry, which has subsequently cost hundreds and hundreds of jobs because the National Party pulled it? That's why the industry weren't interested in contributing in this legislation at the last stages, because the National Party had made it clear they were going to vote it down, whereas previously they had been active and involved in contributing. We know the way that that could change the sustainability of our economy. They did have, well, that's true. The National Party has lost one of its leading environmental thinkers and contributors with the resignation of Nick Smith, and I'm not going to dwell on that other than to say on issues like this, he would have been the sole voice in Cabinet, speaking any sense, and I think, by the sound of the contributions this evening, the sole voice in the caucus speaking sense on this issue. If the National Party is serious about a future for New Zealand that is better than it currently is, it needs to have a plan. It needs to look to the future and say what sort of country and society do we want to have, and a critical part of that has to be sustainability, and the biofuels issue needs to be addressed. And Mr. Speaker, I think it was really petty politics actually that caused the National Party to just dump so hard on the work that the Labour-led government had done previously. With the package that had been worked on so hard, as we've heard already from previous speakers, we know that we would have reduced our greenhouse emissions. We would have had a security in New Zealand, knowing that any biofuels that we did import would not be at the cost of food production, and that's really important, and that we wouldn't have had any threats to our biodiversity. So those were the three critical issues that the Select Committee has looked at and have been discussed with us tonight. Mr. Speaker, these principles, the sustainability of principles that are outlined in this legislation that is now championed by Kennedy Graham, were originally in Labour's Energy, Fuels Levies and References Amendment Act. That was the bill that was not just repealed by National, but repealed under urgency by National. They've done that far too often, Mr. Speaker, under urgency without any consideration or input from the public about an issue that could really help us in the future and make us not just a more sustainable country, but a more envied country internationally, and that's what we should aspire to. We would have had the 60 million litre biodiesel plant in the Bay of Plenty. Is there anyone who currently lives in the Bay of Plenty who says, no, thank you very much, we've got plenty of work up here, we don't want a sustainable industry with high quality, high value, well paid jobs in our area. Please just leave us as we are. I don't think that's true. That 60 million litre plant was pulled after the National Government dumped our legislation. The Bay of Plenty members of Parliament in this House should hang their heads in shame. It is a total disgrace that that huge opportunity for New Zealand was lost because of the National Government's action. We had two production plants in Auckland and Waharoa. Both of them had plans to expand, had gone public on their plans to expand their biofuel production, and that now they've said, well, they're canned. They're put on the side. But Nikki Wagner thinks that's fine. She says, well, she probably says like Jerry Brownlee does about the housing crisis in Christchurch, let's just leave it to the market. This is what happens when you don't support an industry that could do so much better for us as New Zealanders. They just say, well, we're not going to expand, we're not going to build our plants. Mr. Speaker, this is a huge opportunity lost. It's because National has no plan for the future. Between Labour and the Greens, I think we had a really tidy package. There was a huge amount of effort and work gone into it. This legislation deserves to be supported.
Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was